Thanks, G, for asking me back this year again. Control of pertussis is what I'm talking about. And why do it? If we looked at young adults with severe cough for 6 weeks or more, primary care researchers in Oxfordshire have done quite a lot of work. A large proportion of that is whooping cough. So there is that morbidity out there that we're trying to control. But ultimately the whole programme, while it may have an effect on that, isn't targeting that. What it's targeting was that bit, that 4 children die each year. Or if we're looking to last year, 14 children died in 2012. And that's what the programme is really about, is trying to control the deaths in the under 6 months as the major focus. So that's the aim. Why are we talking about it this year? Well, this is pertussis cases per year. And you can see there were no pertussis cases, less than 1,000 per year in the UK, lab confirmed. Last year we had 14,000. The year before about 1,100. So we had this huge spike. And part of that is this looks like the bad year. Every 3 or 4 years we get a bad year. But this year was a particularly bad year. So that's, in a way, the sense of crisis and why we're looking at it seriously. But let's put in a bit of context. Is this massive vaccine failure? Well, if we go back before vaccination, we were talking about 100,000 cases per year. So we've gone from 100,000 where it was down control to less than 1,000, and then has jumped back last year to about 10,000. Equally, in the 70s, the red line here is vaccination coverage. When there was a scare and it dipped, our numbers there jumped up to the 40 to 60,000 incidents per year. So our vaccine programme is still fabulous at controlling it, but not quite as good as it was before. And that excess of cases is enough to be alarmed about. Globally, we think that there are about 16 million cases of whooping cough each year around the world and about 195,000 deaths. So clearly still something to do. But the WHO's estimate is that about 700,000 deaths per year are prevented globally by the vaccination programs, and they're estimating global coverage at about 90%. So this is a major global intervention with a big effect. So that's roughly the status quo and the recent changes. If we want to control whooping cough or pertussis, maybe it's worthwhile knowing who or what we want to control. So this picture is partly here is nice and bright and colourful with a lot of green for Irish people coming to St. Patrick's Day. But it's also the broad Bordetella family. Bordetella pertussis are pathogen, but we can also get some of the other types. And Bordetella bronchoseptica, the big family, is a big multi-host thing. It affects a wide range of animals, and the red here are the human ones. The greens are other animals. You can get outbreaks in rabbitries, etc., affecting them. Your dog can get Bordetella. That's these broad families that can go there. And if you come out to this number 29, what's believed is amongst that family, at some stage, one of those that also can infect humans got trapped in humans. And this offshoot here is what we have as our whooping cough, which is a little bit of that big pertussis family that got stuck in humans, lost some of its genes that let it get anywhere else. So it is now trapped inside us. You almost have a feeling when you hear that pertussis cough, it's this very angry little bacteria that's trying to get out, having been trapped inside humans. But it's in humans, and that's how we've got it. And there are some other types like parapertussis that have seemed to get trapped largely in humans as well, off this broad family. So that's what we're dealing with. When did this happen? If we go back to the history books, we know that measles, perhaps about 3,000 years ago, we first met measles. TB a bit before that, and you can look through historical records and find it. Whooping cough, as we've heard, is really quite a spectacular illness. It wasn't there in 1000 AD or 1200 in any written literature, at least not in Europe. So it looks like 1400 or so is the earliest pertussis in humans. We've only had this genuine issue for about 600 years. That's the history of it in humans, and obviously it's persisted with us rather bravely since then. It is changing. And not to look at the detail, but this is just looking at 1950s to 60s, then 65 to 92, and up to 2008. And if you look at the broad family of subtypes of pertussis in humans, the coloured in bits are the different periods. So you can see these were dominating, then these ones, and now we're filling out these. So it's constantly moving and changing and evolving within us. But most people think it is on a dead end. Having got trapped, it's going to die out in the human species, but it might be about 200,000 years' time. So I think that's the sort of evolutionist looking at it. So while it's doing that, people think we've got to do something else to perhaps control it along the way. So that's the background of pertussis as a bug. What about its relationship with us? Is it good or bad at spreading? Measles is the really good thing at spreading. Every case of measles in an entirely susceptible population, about another 17 or 18 or 19 cases, so it spreads spectacularly Flu maybe up to 2 extra cases on average in the population. Pertussis is in the flu territory. So the estimates are something like the original ones are 14 to 17, some people now say 11 to 15, but if we were all non-immune and one case came into us, it would go to about 10 and then 100. That very spectacular level of spread. The historical stuff looks at least 80% and perhaps closer to 100% of children were getting infected before vaccine. And if I come into my household, and this is getting stuff from way back in the 50s and stuff, when people hadn't vaccination, if I come into a household and I'm infected, on average about 80% of household members get infected. So that's this level of spread, which is not quite measles, but it's right up there. So this is quite a tough thing to control. Then it gets worse, because if we vaccinate against measles once, we know it protects you lifelong, essentially. Once you've had your 2 doses, you're protected. You've got very good protection. If you get natural measles infection, you've got long-term protection. That doesn't seem to hold quite so well for pertussis. So how long does immunity last? The people who've actually measured it, looked at people with infection and then followed out and checked up, give estimates. There's not much data, but in the order of perhaps 7 to 20 years after natural infection, maybe slightly less after vaccination. So having had the infection gives you moderate duration of protection, but then it can come back into us again and again, as we've seen in that child who was vaccinated in childhood but had lost her protection somewhere along the way. Some people doing models against notified disease in the UK put it a lot longer. If I've had natural infection once, I probably won't have severe identifiable, notifiable pertussis for another 30 plus years, maybe 50 years. And again, slightly less perhaps for vaccination. And then actually Richard Pepperdew just talked to you about flu, is one of the authors in this study that was looking at what if we just keep checking everybody's blood every year and see are they having hidden infections that are coming and going. And they're actually finding that 1 to 6% of us are getting infected every year. So again, that's showing that we're not having persistent immunity, we're getting recurrent infections. So what we have now in the post-vaccine era, having started vaccination, is we're getting severe childhood infections in some people under the age of 6 months, moderately severe infections in some of us where we've lost our immunity, but quite a lot of us getting milder versions, either fully asymptomatic or the milder one, a bit like that girl described, that are still nasty, still spreading it, but often not picked up as pertussis. And that's what we're currently living with. And then my last thought in thinking of what we need to understand about it spreading is who's giving it to whom. Particularly who's giving it to the infants under 6 months. And there have been a range of studies on this, and most people say between 50 and 70% of infants pick it up from their close family members, parents or siblings, and to a lesser extent grandparents. Some of them have gone as far as saying, well, within that, who particularly transmits, and a mum who's infected is far more likely to transmit to her child than about 4-fold than another family member. But the young children going to school at 7 and 8, they actually pick up a lot more whooping cough and bring it home. And then have a risk. So dads get it a bit less and pass it on a bit less. Sarah would probably say this is because dads are less involved in the children's lives. I'm quite sure it's to do with dads' better hygiene. But safe to say that there is this quite strong transmission, particularly for mums if they're unfortunate enough to get it, but also throughout the household. So we know that that's about 2/3. And there's a third missing from most of the papers. One of them actually went out and asked if you couldn't find a family member, did a really quite broad, wider context, and said, yes, you can find about 1/3 in the other third, that there are these more casual social contacts in and out of the household that had something very compatible with whooping cough. So even if we fully deal with this, there remains, unless you isolate your kids until they're 6 months and let them out the door, an issue that you still have about 1/3 of the disease that's out there and coming and going in a normal social network. Okay, so back to them. That's a general feel of what pertussis is, how it spreads. If we come back to this idea of that huge rise, more than a 10-fold rise, there were 14 deaths, which isn't great, but it's compared to, I've said about 6 on average here, the last time about 4 on average. So 4 to 6 per year is our average. So we've had a 2 to 3-fold increase in deaths in the last year and a 10-fold increase in pertussis. So that's a bit of a mismatch. If you just trying to pick that apart, and actually these are the under ones have a certain rise and they have a different scale. So the under ones have rather high incidence of disease, you say. But here, if you actually look at these over 15s, you see them particularly rising toward the later last year. So we're getting quite a lot of disease in this group. And if we come back to look at that specifically and pull it apart, here's of the proportion of cases, of the cases is each year. And here's just because we've got for just January for 2013 confirmed. January 2008, 2009, up to 2013. And you can see, even in this period, we're increasingly getting this domination of the over 15s and to an extent 10 to 15s. And the proportion of cases that are in the young kids is actually going down, down, down. In fact, this is still 13 cases under 6 months, but it's 13 here out of 46, and it's 13 here out of 668 in that month. So what we've had is this big increase in older people without that much leaking into our kids in the under 1 type age range. So we're clearly doing something good to control it, and let's just think what we are doing to control it. Fundamentally, the current vaccine programme remains doing a very good job at controlling pertussis. This is from Helen Campbell's review of UK data. And there, if you have to say, okay, having had 1 dose versus no dose, how much protection do you get? So that's looking at children with confirmed pertussis and then going back and checking were they vaccinated at least 2 weeks or more earlier. So just in the under 6 months, 1 dose looks as giving about 64% protection in that study. So it's about 62% protection. So 2 doses about 85 and 3 doses 95. So the vaccine, when given, works, and is working moderately after 1 dose, it looks, and certainly after 2 to 3 doses is working very well. So we've actually got that good protection in place. The problem is that all of the mortality and morbidity really is essentially in this first 6 months of life. And what this picture is saying is that here, after having had 1 dose, you get your protection, 2 doses more and 3 doses more. So we're suddenly gone green and protected. But for this earlier period, we're red and unprotected because we can't vaccinate the kids effectively and get protection before 2 months of age. We're already pushing it down quite young here. The difference, the reason for the orange is this is the amount of green we actually have protection. The yellow are the fact we don't get all our 2-month doses in bang on at 2 months, 3 months at 3 months, 4 months at 4 months. If we shifted ourselves and got very, very timely 100% compliance, that's the gain we get in protection by getting the current vaccines in a very timely way. So one of the messages to all of us is, can we just be very efficient at scheduling? And there has been a UK push scheduling and getting the vaccines in reasonably promptly, but we're already doing quite a lot of protection. But we're left with this bit here, and these are the children we don't really know how to protect. So what can we do to control pertussis in those children? One option people talk about is, as we start getting non-immune here, coming into older childhood and adolescence, should we here at some stage vaccinate? Vaccinate everybody as a teenage booster, vaccinate everybody every 10 years for life, vaccinate people of childbearing age, etc. So there's some thought around here, and there have been a range of interventions. People have heard about cocooning, particularly in California and Australia, where they say, when a child is coming into the world, let's vaccinate around that child, the grandparents, the parents, the siblings, everybody around that child. And as we've seen, the evidence would suggest that 2/3 of transmission into this group are coming from very close identifiable adults. So you could potentially get 2/3 reduction by complete vaccination of that group. It's obviously quite hard to do that in a timely way. Australia would now vaccinate the children at birth and all of those people around them. So you've got that's it. And people are starting and stopping programs like that around the world. So that's one option that do it around. The other one would be, let's just do everybody at the age of 14. So we boost their immunity and carry it on. And what will that do? And I think I'll let you slide. This is a modeller's based slide, but based on data of what they think that would do. Here comes in a childhood vaccinated population. You vaccinate in here again, and the white one is the current situation a lot of our disease is in adolescents and young adults. You'd actually wipe that away to a large extent. They'd have much less, assuming 80% coverage. As the years went on, the prediction is it would rise again. So by the time people are in their mid-20s, they'd actually be having rather similar rates of pertussis as people are having now. And again, in younger childhood, it might be similar. And most people who look at mixing patterns say that the average 17-year-old doesn't see very many young babies, whereas 5-year-olds do have siblings and 25-year-olds do. So there's a real question, would we really be properly protecting the population that are spreading it into the kids? And probably not. And most of the predictions on this are that you'll do a lot about adolescent disease outbreaks in schools, but probably not that much with the young infants by putting that sort of campaign. If you go for every 10 years, you may start doing something a bit wider. But it's obviously rather a huge campaign that actually keeps it suppressed right through the time. And there are various theoretical papers actually with this idea. So this is just a picture, and it's just saying, as you vaccinate, you start doing something which is having effects on mild infections and effects on severe disease. And that the level at which you've got quite a lot of severe disease isn't where there's very low transmission or very high transmission, it's somewhere in between. So there's always this caveat that as we start tinkering with how much transmission is going on in different areas, we can actually affect the amount of severe disease out there in the different age groups. Okay. So that's this general idea of an adolescent booster or surrounding the babies. The other option, as happened to here last autumn, is what about vaccinating pregnant women? And what do we do if we vaccinate pregnant women? Well, one, we've said they're quite good at passing it on to their baby if they get pertussis, so they don't often get it. So by vaccinating them during pregnancy, they'll have fairly good immunity and they boost well to protect them from getting pertussis in the early years of life, in the first year of the child's life. So we're stopping the mum being a source in here, though we're leaving the siblings to be a source in here and the wider community. But also if you vaccinate late enough and the mum has a good high antibody peak, she can have some transplacental transfer of the antibody. And there's good evidence that in the later stage of pregnancy, a lot of that antibody passes across. There's good evidence that a high enough level is achieved to give meaningful protection, although there's really no idea, does it actually work? So we know that we'll stop the mum transmitting quite well, and there are theoretical reasons to think that we'll give protection to the child that will probably last for a couple of months. But there isn't robust empirical data telling us that this is going to work or not. So the current state of play is investigating what's happened last year, and all the children who are now getting pertussis under 6 months are being followed up to see if their mums were vaccinated or not, to start estimating the vaccine efficacy around that. I think the major issue in terms of trying to assess whether this program works or not, which at the moment is our mainstay of protecting this currently unprotected group. Okay. So, and this last slide was just again, so I've got them slightly out of order. This was Massachusetts data, but and here it's a log scale, but it's just to go back to this thought that they were getting about 10,000 reported cases in their local population. They dropped with vaccination. They've again increased, but again, their increase is down here to 1 to a couple of thousand. This was the 1920s, where all disease was in the under 10s. This was their more recent data in the vaccine, where they have a tiny bit here and a great big bulk here. So I think there is something for us as a group. If what we're really interested in is just sorting out this bit, then the pregnancy approach to vaccination may well be the right way to get that. If we do actually think, compared to that story we've just heard, that this is also a significant public health problem, then we would have to look at something in adolescence instead of or in addition to what we're doing with pregnant women. Okay. Thank you.